Hi, hello, and welcome to In Plain Sight. In the last episode, we talked about our experiences with Savannah, Georgia, and tonight we're going to be talking about languages, why it's important to learn, and our own personal experiences with language. Tin, you want to tell us your drink tonight?
Yeah, sure. The best language in the world is alcohol, right? So I've brought to the table today Stella Artois. Artois, Stella. I don't care. It's a
There you
beer
go.
that comes out of, I don't know. And it comes in a green bottle, which I don't know if you guys know this. There's actually nothing about a green bottle that I have to tell you that is interesting. Stella is like a lightweight Heineken. It's kind of half sour, half bitter, and it's good enough to drink, but it's not worth buying. Not from this review, at least.
I've cringed so much in the past 20 seconds.
Yeah,
It
that was
hurts.
cool. But I didn't really have a review for Stella. I didn't prepare one. I didn't even plan to bring Stella to our episode today, but I don't really have anything for you guys as far as drinks concerned. It's a decent beer. It's my family grew up drinking Heineken, right? And Vietnamese people were really well known for drinking Heineken, at least within our circles. And I can't drink Heineken; it's too bitter. I don't like it. And Stella's kind of a halfway between Heineken and halfway between Peroni, which is kind of beer is that? I don't know.
I don't know. I assume Italian or something. Do you think Stella's worth the cost?
Well, Andy, these days I'm not poor anymore, so I don't know what to pay for beer. So yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe.
Okay. I mean, to me personally, no. Like if I'm going to go spend money on Stella, I'd go get a beer that actually tastes good.
Oh, it doesn't taste that bad, man.
After your review, I think it tastes terrible. Do you want to tell us what are the flavor notes you're getting right now? Is it more foot sweat?
So it tastes like you should talk about what you brought to the table today.
With that amazing segue, I actually brought my favorite scotch, one of my favorite scotches of all time, Glimmerany Signet. So yeah, it's another Highland, or actually it's probably my first Highland that I've done here. It's really smooth, it's amazing, chocolatey, kind of peanut buttery, a lot of caramel, a lot of oak, very smooth. It's amazing, worth every penny. Buy a bottle, try it, thank me later. You're welcome. That's all I got.
Whoever's made it to the fourth episode at this point, I think this is the fourth, right? I think they're starting to think that you're a Scotch snob.
I am. Definitely. Although I don't know if there's many scotches I don't like, so maybe I just like scotch.
A Cutty Shark.
Oh, no, good scotches. Sorry, there's not many like normal scotches.
Point proven.
What about you, man? It's only 8 a.m. in Singapore. What are you drinking today?
So I got some more looks from my family when I brought out this, but it's 8 a.m. in the morning. But I brought a Guinness Stout. I'm not going to be drinking this morning because last time I had a hangover in the middle of the afternoon.
Nice.
But I bring in this to the table because this was actually my introduction to stout beers. And when I first had a Guinness, I hated it and didn't like it, and I just kept giving it a try. And now I love stout beers, and I love trying them.
So I'm going to disagree with your family's sentiment about day drinking and your halfway hangover here. Where Guinness comes from, which I can't remember, people actually drink Guinness for breakfast. They don't just drink Guinness for breakfast. They drink Guinness here in the United States for breakfast too, in some breakfast joints. So
it's a meal replacement shake.
So it's only 4.2% alcohol by volume. So why don't you go ahead and crack that bitch open and drink it?
No, I am curious, Matt, can you check that? Is it 4.2%? Because if he got that right, but can't tell us where it's from.
Yes, 4.2%. Yeah.
Jesus.
So, it's like milk, man. You might as well go ahead and drink one can, right? All right, Matt,
maybe not today. Yeah.
What are we chatting about?
So today we're talking about languages, and I know we've all had some experiences with learning languages, either as a first or a second language, and wanted to explore our own personal experience with it, and why do we think that Americans should learn a second language?
Sure. Well, before we get into the conversation, Matt, why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background as to why language is important to you? Because I think that you would be the first authority between the three of us when it comes to language, even though, damn it, Andy doesn't speak Korean. I was going to say the both of us are
Nope.
bilingual.
Spoiler alert, everybody. I only speak one language. I am like the least skilled person in this chat room. You want to listen to these two guys.
So what's your background in history and language?
My own personal background is, I grew up speaking only English. It wasn't until I actually joined the military, left the States, and moved to South Korea to serve in the Air Force. And within the first 2 weeks there, I decided I'm going to learn Korean. So I just spent every day for the next few weeks just learning how to read and speak Korean, and never really made it super far, but enough to have small conversations and to make people laugh. But I thought it was a great way for me to connect with the local people in South Korea. Now I am an English teacher, and I teach English to Chinese students online. And I was also taught in Cambodia, where I used to teach kids living in villages. So that's my personal.
So I feel like you're cutting yourself short a little bit here, and I think it's important to note like the full history. So you joined the Air Force, you went to Korea, you learned Korean while you were there. You were in Cambodia and you learned Cambodian.
Yeah,
while
I've
you were
learned some
Cambodian.
Yeah, sorry. I Khmer.
Oh, Khmer.
Yes.
Khmer.
Yes.
You learned Khmer while you were there. You came back. You married your Singaporean wife, and now you live there, and you're learning Mandarin there. So I just think it's interesting. Have you learned a language where you didn't reside in the country before learning it?
No, I have never done that. Now that you mention it.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's super interesting.
So
Yeah.
can I ask you a question, Matt? Might get a little personal.
Yes.
Okay. Why do you choose to use one piece of tape for that poster directly behind you? And the animals poster, you use like a shitload of packing tape at the top. But was it like falling down a lot? I mean,
Yes, this one was.
You murdered the tape at the top there. Your tacks worked very well.
This was
I feel bad for the wall.
This was a quick 30-second job in between classes because it fell down.
Gotcha.
In my class.
I can tell.
Yes.
I'm just. What was the chain of thought? Did you put a piece of tape up there? You're like, it needs another one. It needs another one.
Yes. My chain of thought was I put on tape that I thought it was okay. It was fine, and it fell down. But it stayed there for the past year and a half.
So you did a 30-second job, and you've lived with it for the last year and a half.
Yes. It did the job.
So teaching English now to Chinese students, what value do you see in an American who generally only speaks English to learn a second language?
I think the value in the States, at least, is that there might be whole communities of people that you might be missing out on experiences that you wouldn't be able to get without getting to know them. And sure, yes, you might be able to communicate with them with just English, but I feel like when you try to put in the effort to learn a second language, it shows that you're actually genuinely interested in them and their culture, and it shows that you generally, people, like, as soon as you learn that, show that they a few words, they're like, oh my god, you're awesome, thank you so much for learning my language, why don't talk to my friends over here, and then it just kind of like genuinely bring you in. Whereas I feel like even with just English speaking people, if you just try, hey, how's it going, they're like, who are you?
So I think to put it in better perspective too, Malcolm Gladwell, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Malcolm Gladwell. He has a book, I want to say it's called Tipping Point, where he talks about a story, and Malcolm Gladwell has a specific way he tells a story, and then he goes through that story and talks about the sociology behind it. Um, he has a story about an Asian pilot who was coming in to fly into JFK. He was trying to land, he was low on gas, and he was trying to tell the watchtower, I need to land now. But when you listen to the conversation log, what you hear is the Asian person saying, hey, we're low on gas. If you guys have time, we need to land. And the watchtower is backed up with tons of planes. So they could reply back, is it an emergency? Do you need to land now? And he would say, like, whenever you have time. Um, the language barrier that was happening would force that to stop. So language isn't just what's being interpreted to you. Language is the culture that it comes from. So within the Asian culture, it was rude to talk to your superiors or to anybody else and tell them, no, I need this now, give it to me. As Americans, we're okay with saying that because, at some level we feel entitled. In a lot of cultures, that is extremely rude. So
no, we don't.
so learning that language, and at least learning what the capabilities of that language, and even with Koreans, they have and I'm sure Matt can go into this more, they have ways to end sentences that provide a certain level of respect to the person listening. So it's important to keep that in mind. Like, that is actually a key part of their language, and messing that up makes you sound weird.
Right.
And
usually in Korean, like one of the first few questions they ask you is, how old are you? Even if they look the same age, like 1 or 2 years difference can mean a lot in how you speak to each other.
Well, I think the Korean airlines, they all speak English because of this, right? I've read stories about it on the all-knowing Reddit.com that Korean pilots do this. Well, so here's the question: is you're talking about the second language, but I speak 2 languages, and I can make a little bit of conversation in French. So maybe 2.1 languages, 2.2, because I make a little conversation in Japanese too. But how does somebody go about learning a language and then dedicating their time to that and somehow find value in learning a second or a third or a fourth language, whatever it is, especially when, here in the States, English is kind of just fine, right?
Right.
I mean, I agree with you. I think, language does allow you to connect with people in a certain way that if you were just speaking English to somebody who is speaking English as a second, third, fourth language, would change the dynamic of that relationship. But how would somebody go about learning another language?
There's actually a lot of resources out there right now, and it's just a matter of your own preferences. For me, I prefer to learn how to read and write a language first because it helps me to connect the sound to what's on paper. So you can go to resources and just click Google search the language I want to learn, say Korean, how to read and write Korean, and just find what you think is best for you. There's other resources called like Duolingo, which is similar to Rosetta Stone in that it shows you mainly pictures first and just kind of gently guides you to learning the language just from like pictures and images of text and sound rather than just hard memorization. Or you can just listen to movies and TV shows and just read the subtitles and try to connect the sounds with the words with the text at the bottom, the English text.
What do you think, Andy?
So I guess a couple comments. Like I've tried and failed to learn Spanish 5 times in like the past 6 months. So my thing is I used Duolingo, I used Memrise, I used all the websites I can find that like offer free courses, and I have a lot of Spanish vocabulary under my belt. I've got no grammar. So
right.
I can say simple sentences, but I couldn't have a conversation that lasts more than 10 seconds. I think learning a language and this is probably where I'm going to part ways a lot of the times in this conversation. I think learning the language itself is helpful if you have a practical use for it. For me, learning the language, I think appreciating the language is a better term, allows you to have some kind of cultural appreciation for the speaker. And then that's where I'm going to go with that. Just to go back to Tim's question though, learning to me actually needs more of a formal setting. You need a teacher who is fluent enough in it that can guide you to use the vocabulary that you learn in a way that's actually practical. I'm not, and I'm not sure if you guys are going to disagree with me on this one, but I'm not one to say that learning a language should ever just be for fun, mainly because it's not fun to me. I just think learning language is a practical tool. And that's basically like you should only learn language if you want the practical side of it. I think you can appreciate a language without ever learning how to speak it.
Yeah, I think that if language was easily taught and learned, it would be something that would bring some sort of value for an individual who would have not been interested in doing so otherwise to pick up an interest in doing so. I've taken an interest in ASL, and I can tell you that after 2 years of ASL, the only thing that I can do now is to flick you a bird, but everybody knows what that means, right? The reason why I say that is because, Matt, as a language teacher, you're in a little bit of a different position, I think, than most people, in that, language requires a lot of repetition, but not just repetition by yourself, but with real practical practice, right?
And that's where I think I had the advantage, that because each language I was learning, I was there.
Right.
I was among the people. So maybe I'm a bit biased in that way, or
right. So,
but
go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, well, what I'm trying to drill down to, and I think learning other languages is partially romantic and partially kind of cool, right? On a spiritual level, and I don't know if intellectual would be the way to say it, but it's kind of there's something about going to a group of people that you don't speak the language natively, and you're able to converse with them in their native language, that the reaction that they give you initially is kind of cool. But at the same time, you kind of sit back and you're like, well, was that worth learning their language just to experience that one moment of cool, right?
I can tell you one time learning a second language has really helped me out. When I was in Cambodia, the police are not very friendly, and they like to take bribes and just pull you over for random reasons. But the time that did pull me over was actually legit in the sense that I was riding a scooter, and foreigners are not allowed to. So they pulled me over and they asked me to come over, and I know usually the asking price starts at like $50 to $100, or they can even ask you for more depending on how they feel. But the few words I know is more geared towards flirting a little bit at the time. So when I went up to the police chief, I was like, in the language, like, hello, hi, you are so handsome, you are so pretty.
How did that work out for you?
You go to prison afterwards?
Yes. And he couldn't stop laughing. He's just like, all right, fine, just give me $5 and go. You're whatever. You're hilarious. Let's go. Get out of your way. Yeah, so that at that point, like, he could tell. Yeah, that really helped me out.
So I'm really curious, because you do this for a living. Like, what's your process in taking somebody, and how good's your Mandarin? Like scale 1 to 10, or professional versus like intermediate?
0.
0.
0.5.
Okay. So
yes.
when you're teaching students to speak English, you're teaching them in English then, right?
Correct.
So how
Fully
do
in
you
English.
So
if they
I
speak Chinese,
assume
I'm like, no.
I assume the students have at least an elementary grasp of English. How do you take them from there to finishing your course?
I tried to meet them where they're at. I try within the first few minutes, I get a good grasp of like what their capabilities are, what they already
And what
know.
is that typically? What on average? What is that? Where are they at?
They already have some familiarity with English. I teach them at different levels within English, from beginners to conversational. Um, so usually I'll ask them a few questions just to gauge where they're at, and like, hi, how are you? What do you like to do in your free time? What did you do today? What did you do yesterday? And usually within those 3 or 4 questions, I like, okay, because he spoke to me in this way, using proper grammar, it's like I know you understand these kind of general concepts. So now I can open up the conversation to other topics. And usually as I'm going on, I have them read the lesson, and then I will, even if they can read the word fluently, I would ask them like, do you actually know this word? Like, what does this mean to you? And I ask them kind of critical thinking questions that maybe you would get in a normal English class in the States.
Mhm.
So I try to ask them critical thinking, like, think what is this word trying to show? What is the sentence trying to say? And I just go from there. And I just use a lot of movements, hand
So
gestures.
would you apply those same principles if you were learning any language? So if for instance, if I for some reason decided to go for my 50th try at learning Spanish, should I start asking myself, in what way would I use this word in a sentence? And should I be asking myself like more critical thinking, how can this word be used? What's the mechanism of the word?
I think it's difficult when you don't have that other teacher feedback. If you're going that route, I think it's useful to create sentences like, okay, what words do I know? How can I combine these words to form new sentences? And try to be funny with it. Like, if I learned the dog in red, a very simple language sentence, I could say, the dog is red. That's not right. Or maybe not red, but purple or something. But that's a very simple way of explaining it. But just try to come up with funny ways to create sentences, and then if you have the chance to, try to talk, try to practice in that similar kind of manner with someone who speaks that language, like a
Like a pen
friend,
pal
if
or
you have it.
something? I guess,
What's
do
that?
pen pals exist anymore? Do people still have pen pals?
There are platforms where you can do this. There's like platforms where you're learning, you wanting to learn Chinese, for example. That Chinese person wants to learn English, and you can send letters to each other through this platform, and you can correct each other's written language.
That's cool.
And there are some websites where they focus more on adults, where you have conversations in that target language that you're trying to learn.
Okay. Are there languages that you think are easier because you've learned at least 4 now, right? So are there languages that you think are easier than others?
Korean for sure, even though it sounds
Coming from
kind of,
English, I assume.
yes. The reason why I think Korean is easier to learn, even though it might sound counterintuitive because it's so different from English, is because it's so different from English. You don't have that, you don't have like, oh, this sound looks like it's supposed to sound like A, but actually in that language is ah or something. Whereas in Korean, you have to start from scratch and learn the phonics for each of the characters in that language. And Korean was made purposely to be easy for the general people to actually learn the language very quickly. It was purposely made, one of the few languages that was actually purposely made by the government, hundreds of years ago. And
Just hundreds of
and
years ago.
maybe
I
thousands.
actually I didn't think it was that long ago. I thought it was just over a century. I'm curious though.
You mean for the Korean language?
Yeah. It's not that
So,
old.
so are you talking about the Korean language as far as the written alphabet's concerned,
Fif-
or
15
go ahead?
15th century.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
There
15th
you go.
century.
So hundreds of years ago. That
Interesting.
works.
So,
Okay.
uh, let's get some clarity here. Are you saying that the language was just developed in the 15th century, or
No.
was the language already there?
So from my understanding, go ahead, Matt. This is yours.
No, they from my, like, also from my understanding that they were speaking, they're part of Chinese government as well, or they used to had a lot of connections to Chinese languages. I want to say like part of Chinese government. I take that back. But Chinese as a language is very difficult. It's not phonics based. You have to
Well,
memorize each character for words. But whereas in Korea was struggling to trying to build up the literacy rates. So the government purposely it got their scientists, their version of scientists at the time, to create a language that is easy for the uneducated mass to learn that language. And then it just kind of morphed over time
well,
to what it is today.
let's set the record straight here, right? Is that there's no really there's no such thing as Chinese language. When you're saying Chinese, you're not really speaking of a real language, because Chinese have so many dialects, which is what we call them today. But the reality of it is that the history of China and most of that landmass in the Orient of Asia is that it's been a lot of tribes, a lot of small city states and villages that spoke different languages, that eventually, when they were all conquered by the different warlords in China, that they unified what they call China is today, that we have this word called the Chinese language. So what was the Korean
You're
language?
right. You're right, Lisa, with the spoken form of it. There's so many dialects. Joyce's family is Teochew dialect. But for the most part, in the history, the written part is all the same for all the dialects.
Right. Yeah, well, if you look at Japanese kanji and then you look at Chinese, the Chinese characters, they're most of them are the same thing, right? They mean the same thing. They sound different, but
Right.
where I was getting to is that was the Korean language another what we would consider today dialect of Chinese?
I don't necessarily know if it was a dialect of Chinese at the time. Could have been. But I think if I were to say that, and people actually listen to us, there'll be a lot of angry Korean people.
I don't know. That's a very interesting question to me. I have no
It
idea.
it is an interesting question, but to give a definite say, like, yeah, Korean is just a dialect of Chinese, I think,
Yeah,
or at least early Korean.
I think if I said the same thing about the Vietnamese language, maybe some Vietnamese people won't be happy about it, but there are words in the Vietnamese language that match words in maybe the Cantonese language. Everybody's heard the story Mulan, right? And Mulan's name is Hua Mulan, which Hua in that particular dialect of Chinese, I think it's Cantonese, means flower. In Vietnamese, the word hoa means flower. And you can find a lot of words that share a lot of sound semblance with different dialects of Chinese that you can find in Vietnamese, that you can say, okay, well, maybe they did derive from one another.
I
So
mean,
that's where I was
I
getting.
mean, if you're talking about borrowed words, even in English, we have borrowed words from German, French,
Sure.
and but we don't say that's necessarily a dialect of French or German.
Well,
There's some
I would
it's still
say that it's
Indo-European
a
language,
dialect
right?
of Latin. Like
Right,
it's all
right.
Latin
right.
based, right?
Right. And they all branch from that, and we call that an Indo-European or a Latin-based language, right? Whereas,
Right.
Chinese Chinese language,
Yes.
it's not quite so much an Indo-European language. It's not at all. But
Right.
that's what I was wondering is that okay? What was Korea just another group of people who lived on that landmass that just didn't become part of that conquering massive land that became China that we know today. And that's why they get to have their own identity, they get to have their own languages. But to say that the Korean language was established in the 15th century, I'm just kind of trying to flesh out what that really means, right?
I don't have a good answer because I don't have a full understanding of Korean's history around that time era. I do know that. What's that?
Sorry. I don't have the language answer for you, but I think culturally it was significant. Culturally, creating that language was important for them to establish an identity outside of China, outside of Japan, outside of those wars that defined who they were. And if it wasn't really for that, I don't know if Korea would be the Korea that it is today economically after the 15th century. Like, well, we're probably looking at the 20th century, but I mean, economically, from the 20th century on, they were just a powerhouse compared to where they were coming from. So I think that language ended up being the spark that just set everything else on fire. So a language basis, I don't know. I can't answer your question, but culturally, it changed them significantly. It let them have an independence that they wouldn't have had otherwise if they were constrained by somebody else's identity.
So what about the English language? You know, the English language is used almost everywhere in the world, whether if it's kind of broken, really broken so much to the point that we can't understand it. How valuable is English to people that are not inside the United States? I mean, you know, my parents are immigrants, and Annie's mother and her side of the family are immigrants. So, you know, English to them was very valuable. From your perspective, being married, your wife is Singaporean, who don't cook Singaporean noodles for some reason, but you know, so how
Don't exist.
is it
Any
to
noodles they
her
make is Singaporean.
and her family to speak English? Because when I met her family, Martin, her brother at least, you know, he spoke really good English. So
Yeah, it's his first language.
oh, that's interesting.
Wow, you speak really good English.
Yeah. So
Thanks.
obviously it's really important to them, right?
Right. Yes.
You know, the power of the English language. It's something else. Now for American people, I know I'm talking to a guy who's living in Singapore, an expat right now. You know, let's drill it down, man. Okay, what makes something so in plain sight for people? What makes it valuable for them to get out of their way and learn it easily, and why, right? It's okay if I'm traveling around the US or going to Canada or going to Mexico, which are bordering the United States. What's the value? And I think I can answer that, but let's hear your opinion.
I think we talked a lot about the value of getting to meet other people and explore other cultures. But there's even just brain development wise, there's some value to, even if you're never going to speak to another foreign language, I want to say foreign language, another language speaking people. If you learn a second language, the studies have shown that it helps your brain develop, where it allows you to multitask easier and faster. And when you learn another language, usually they have their own way of thinking about the world built into the language itself. So if you learn for example, Chinese, if you speak and think in the language, you will think about whatever issue you're trying to solve in a different way, just naturally thinking in that language. So I think there's a value in learning a language just for that purpose, just to give yourself another perspective on whatever issue you're trying to tackle.
Can I jump in next before you give your amazing answer, Tim?
I don't have an answer.
Oh, I thought you said you had the answer for that.
No. Yeah, I probably lied.
So I think the in plain sight side of it, I think there's I know there's a growing culture in the United States that's loving Japanese anime.
Weeps.
Learning, yeah. Well, you know, call them what you want to. I'm not. I think weep is a good term now. I didn't think it used to be, but I guess weep is a good term now.
I was one, right?
Oh yeah,
right.
All three of us were. So I like learning that language, going in there and watching the anime, if you will. You will pick up some terms. You'll start saying "sugoi" when something cool happens. Like having the feeling that's attached to the word gives you a bit more of a cultural influence inside of you. It makes you understand how another language can make you feel something that can't really be expressed in your own. So the in plain sight of it is actually understanding that your own language is limited in its capability of actually expressing an emotion. The thing about our Germanic dialect is that we are very much a this is this period, and it really only means this thing, and maybe mean this one other thing. What I mean by that is if you look at Hispanic cultures, they'll have words that actually have emotions attached to them, like that there's actually a feeling meant when you say certain words. So when we say words, we just mean it literally, like this is what it is. If I'm talking about a book, I'm talking about a book. But the feeling of that word can be different when interpreted. Interpretation doesn't get you an exact replica of what was actually being said, which is why interpretations don't always work in courtrooms. There's tends to be people who will always disagree about the same terms. And if you ever watched a United Nations, I'm probably boring people at this point, but if you ever watched a United Nations telecast, listening to the interpreters, you can hear the hesitation in them, and there's a team back there. They're all interpreting. They're all just like trying to agree, and it's incredible because one false interpretation can take something that's innocent and make it demeaning. And I think that's the in plain sight of it. If you can learn another language and appreciate what it is, you won't fall prey to a bad interpretation.
Right. That's true.
So I mean, with that, have you noticed that in Singapore since you've been there? Have you noticed that certain things just don't translate well, or certain feelings don't translate well between Mandarin and English?
I don't have in Singapore, they mainly speak in English. Like everything is done in English. All the government declarations are done in English. They do have translations in the back afterwards with in Mandarin or other dialects or in Malaysian. I forgot what the language is from Malaysia. But so I don't have a good answer for you from Singapore side. Yes, I don't. Sorry.
Is it so from my understanding, traveling, like going on vacation in Singapore is typically going off the island, right? It's like you guys go across the bridge and go into Malaysia, is that right?
Correct. Right.
So do you guys see that barrier with English as you turn into Malaysia? Or
even
do
in
they
Malaysia,
typically speak English?
They all typically speak English.
Wow.
Yes, it's for the most part, a lot of, or anyway, in Singapore and Malaysia, they try to speak English purposely to try to do well economically in the world, because they understand that English is the language of business. And in Singapore, in schools, they are only allowed to speak English for the most part. You can speak Chinese with your friends, on your side and stuff like that. But when you're in class, the teachers all speak English. The lessons are in English. The TV shows are all in English on TV.
So that's interesting. So Chinese is spoken, some dialect of Chinese is spoken at home, and English is otherwise professionally and academically used.
Right, exactly.
Whoa, that is weird. Because
yeah.
And that's true in Singapore and Malaysia?
I'm not quite sure in Malaysia, but I know because they're not as developed as Singapore is. I know in Malaysia, they do focus a lot on English. That's for the sake of that economic reasons. But I don't think it's to the same degree as Singapore is.
So Steph and I were, Steph's my wife. She speaks, her first language was Spanish. And she speaks primarily English now. A common phrase we use in the States, at least, is Spanglish. And it's this mix of Spanish and English because there's not always a way to describe something in one language. So you end up using both. Have you noticed that in Singapore, where I think the term, and I saw this on YouTube a couple times, Chinglish. Is that a thing?
Singlish.
Okay.
Yes. So I see where you're going with this now. So there is, yes. In a professional setting, or actually no, even in a professional setting, they will speak a form of Singlish, which is a combination of English, Mandarin, and a lot of hodgepodge of different languages mixed from everybody around Singapore. So from like Malaysian, Indonesian, Indian, and it's just like a big hodgepodge mixed into one language, which is Singlish. But it's not, Singlish is not something that is formally taught at all. It's just a way of speaking. But whenever you were, especially the more higher up the business chain you go, I feel like, or at least in government or in education, the more formal your English will be when you're speaking. But when in just everyday conversations, it's a lot of mixture of Singlish.
So
But it sounds like you're there speaking English, but every now and then you'll just hear one or two words like, huh? That's not quite English, is it? Did I understand you right?
So I actually have the same question for Tin, because I've been in enough places. I have a huge confession. I've been to several Asian restaurants with Tin, and they don't, like, I don't know, maybe 20% of them were Vietnamese. Tin primarily orders for me at these places because I like freeze up when they ask me what I want in a different language. I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. So Tin would be like green beans and chicken. So I'm curious. I've never heard of like Vietnamese English. Like, do you often see like you're fluent Vietnamese, or do you see the two languages ever combined in a conversation?
Yeah, sure. I think the reason why we see a lot of Vietnamese and English being combined is because generally the first generation Americans who are kids to Vietnamese immigrants, we don't know the entire vocabulary of the Vietnamese language. So when we're speaking to our elders, we tend to mix in a lot of English words because we don't have anything else to put into there. And if you look at it, there are a lot of things that we participate in a first world country that a third world country just they don't really have any exposure to, right? As if we were talking about rocket science or Albert Einstein and the hydrogen bomb or whatever else. So something along the lines where in their wildest dreams, until now they're starting to modernize, that back in the 80s and 90s, we just didn't have words for them. And so that's why we mix a lot of English words into our language and then kind of try to explain what those words mean to our grandparents or our parents, because they weren't there. And there were a lot of language concepts that exist in English that didn't exist in Vietnamese. Growing up, it was very difficult being sarcastic around my parents because they didn't know what sarcasm meant. So they took everything at face value. And so when we were being sarcastic with our non-Vietnamese uncles or aunts, they're like, "Why are you being so rude?" Well, no, we're not. This is normal. This is a normal part of English speech, right? It's what Matt had mentioned earlier, and Andy, you dove deep into it too, is that when you understand a different language, you understand the emotions and the different nuances that other languages have that you can't convey just by speaking or listening to in English, right? The emotions that come through with different languages are not the same as language that you know of your own. Now, I'm not like Matt or like Martin or people who have second languages, because both my languages practically came in at the same time. I learned how to speak English and Vietnamese at the same time, so I don't look at them as a first and second language. Now, one of the biggest difficulties that we have today in the United States, at least, is that, we're becoming a country with a lot of immigrants, or at least children of immigrants. But the children of immigrants, including myself, we're finding it very difficult to teach our kids that original language that our parents knew, right? So for example, my kids, they can only speak English to their grandparents. And despite me trying to teach them, it's difficult because, there's this whole entire feeling of leaving. Cynthia is my wife and she only speaks English, and there's this difficulty of feeling like you're leaving your spouse out and their mother out of a part of our kids' lives if I try to push my people's language, my parents' language, onto my kids, and then 75% of the household speaks language, but my wife, their mother doesn't, right? And I can tell you, and you probably know this, Matt, learning an Asian language is very difficult. And I know that learning English can be difficult too, but you look at this entire world. You said something earlier that kind of piqued my interest about English being the business language of the world, but that's not just all. When you think about that, you're thinking about guys who are working for the executives of Toyota and Intel and AMD and all these big guys, right? But then you see all these, whether they're legal or illegal immigrants, come over to the United States, whether it's from Mexico, China, Indonesia, wherever else, and they're waiting tables, and they speak English, and they speak pretty good English too, right? And they come from countries where it's not like Singapore, where they're learning in English and they're speaking English every single day. They're learning English for the sake of coming over here and doing a job that barely pays any money. So it's kind of a weird dynamic of foreigners who come over here and speak English a lot better than most of us could ever speak their languages. I had mentioned in the last episode while we were leaving off, there's this YouTube channel. This guy calls himself Xiaoman or something like that. He's a white guy that speaks Chinese, Cantonese, and Mandarin. I think he speaks Mandarin very well. He speaks Cantonese too, but he's learned Navajo. He's learned different languages that you find in India. He goes around and learns different people's languages, goes into those districts in the United States, speaks that language to the elders, and capture their reaction on camera. And everybody is always impressed, or at least the ones they publish, right? And I mean, looking from learning a language from that perspective of impressing somebody, you always impress somebody new, because if you're going to someplace new, somebody will be like, hey, that white guy or that Asian guy is speaking my language, or that Mexican guy is now speaking Vietnamese, which is really cool. But, I think the value goes beyond that initial shock from the native speaker to say, okay, well, you respect my people, or at least me enough to converse with me in my language. And I think that there's value in that, because if you walk into, say, I can tell you this, if you walk into a Vietnamese restaurant or a nail salon owned by Vietnamese people, and you're white, and you start speaking Vietnamese to them, there's going to be an uproar inside the salon or a restaurant, not in a bad way, but just in a surprising way, right? Just because
I'm gonna go learn Vietnamese for my next mani-pedi.
Well, go for it, because it's totally not worth it. But I think the thing is that learning a second, third, fourth language, whatever it is, it's extremely difficult. And I found value in speaking to people in their languages. But I can tell you that here's the other thing I kind of want to chat about 10 minutes is that when I was learning Japanese, a lot of Japanese were really hesitant to speak Japanese with me, and there may be other underlying reasons as to why they were hesitant to do so, but they're also learning how to speak English, right? So they're here trying to speak English, so the last thing they want to do is speak Japanese. But being able to converse with somebody in their native language, I think, is extremely paramount in learning another language. That's why I was asking you earlier, what are the best and easiest ways to learn a new language if you wanted to? And whether that's Rosetta Stone or some app, Duolingo or whatever it is, to do so, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
It's a matter of preference.
Well,
but before I want to ask you a question about the preference thing. I do want to add some context really late into this. Tin, 4 languages, right? English, Vietnamese, Japanese, and Korean, right?
No, French. I learned French in high school, but the most broken sentence I can say is "Je suis la jeune fille." That means I'm a little girl, or at least it's supposed to say I'm a little girl in French. But anyways, go ahead. Continue with your question.
So yeah, what Tin was talking about, Matt, like you're saying preference, but what does that mean? Like, all right, I have failed. I don't know. I'm gonna make another number up. I just keep going up. I failed 100 times now on learning Spanish. Like, I don't know what's right for me. Like, what's my preference? Like, everything I've done has met some kind of wall. I can tell you a ton of words. Like I can look at the bottom right of your poster and say caballo, but I couldn't use that in a sentence. Like,
Right.
where do I go from here?
Hang on, let me stack onto Andy's questions. And okay, Andy's learning, right? And when I go through learning languages too, the question is, how do you go from just knowing it from a technical perspective? Because when I say je suis, I know that's, I am, right? Because I've been saying it for so long. But if I go to a different language like Mandarin, and I know the words, if you can't feel it, if you can't cognitively process it, like we do the languages that we speak, right, is it really about preference? How do you transform that?
For that, if you're at that stage where like you for the most part you understand some of the structure, you understand some of the vocabulary, I think the only step you can go towards is actually speaking with the person who speaks that language and getting that feedback from them. Like you try to say your sentence and like, that you don't say it exactly that way. Let me tell you a better way of saying it, or more naturally speaking it. I think
so. I like back where we're from in Hinesville, Georgia. How do
Yeah.
we find that?
I was going to ask.
Yes, exactly. And that's the difficult part in the States,
Yeah.
isn't it? Is if you don't have immediate access, it's difficult unless you are willing to pay money for it, which can be expensive. But I think it's just a matter of how far you want to take it, So if you're in a small rural area, that would be difficult to find someone, unless you go out of your way to another city somewhere or find a pen pal somehow on the internet. But there are services out there, websites where you can go to where you pay a fee to a person and you just talk with them privately, like how we're doing right now on Zoom, and just pay them per lesson and just try to have conversations with them.
So I get all that. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, if you could wrap this up in like 2 minutes about how language is really important, or at least has some value to somebody, whether they're in Singapore, United States, or in Russia, as to why they should learn it if they don't plan to travel out of the States and they're just dealing with, and I think the United States is a great example, and Singapore too, a hodgepodge of people, right? And different languages. So give us that kick for 2 minutes. Throw it. Give us your pitch.
Or why people should learn English or learn a second language.
A second language without beating the same dead horse.
I would try. I think it gives, like I've said it already, but I think it gives you a window into that language's culture, the way of thinking. And when you have a good grasp of that language, when you are that capable, it gives you a different way of thinking. And I think it gives you some, it forces you to think of the issue that's in front of you in different ways. Like, yes, sorry, I can't think of it.
Oh, that's fine. Don't beat the dead horse one last time. Just fuck it. Right?
Sorry.
Right. Man, that was a good conversation, man. What do we got going on next week?
All right, Fong. Then sorry. It's your choice, or it's you're next on the list to host the show next, right?
Let's you guys know I just got back from this cross country trip where we did 8,000 miles across the southern United States from Georgia all the way out to Utah and back. And one of the coolest things that I saw on my entire trip, I've never seen in my life anymore. It's in Louisiana. You can see roadkill alligator. I've never seen roadkill alligator before in my life. But one of the great things about Louisiana is Cajun food. If you guys can't tell by now, I'm a fat kid, right? I love
Wait. Did you eat the alligator?
Yeah, I would have. Yeah, it was a little spoiled. From boudin balls to boudin sausages to gumbo, rice and beans and crabs and crawfish and low country boil. There's something special about food that you find in Louisiana. So that's what we're going to get into.
It's my favorite.
So that's what we'll do, man. Next week, we'll get into Cajun food, a little bit about the Cajuns' history as far as I know, and then really dive into what's important, man, is making our stomachs happy. What else you got for us, Matt? Before we sign off here.
Well, it was been fun. It was worth it waking up at, well, now it's not so early now. It's 8 a.m. I do feel bad that I woke up my family to do this podcast. My
It was
wife
worth
wasn't
it
happy.
though, right?
Yeah, it's worth it. Riley was happy to wake up. Like, oh, hey, it's time to wake up now. So,
Yeah.
All right,
Guys.
guys. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, Matt, this is yours.
Yeah, it's
all right.
yours. Close it up.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Join us for our next episode.
All right, good deal.